Now that it's been about a minute, hello, thank you so much everybody for coming. My name is Iona Volinets. I'm the Volunteer Committee Coordinator for the Blue Shield UK Conflict and Military Activity Working Group, and welcome to the Working Group's webinars about conflict and the risks to UK heritage. And today, our webinar will be by Brittni Bradford, a researcher at Newcastle University focused on digital geospatial mapping to support heritage protection and the different ways that heritage actors and institutions can contribute to the protection of cultural property and related legal implementation. Our session today will focus on the key elements of the 1954 Hague Convention and its second protocol, specifically the significance for cultural property protection. And just a warning for all of you, we're having a little bit of tech issues with the mic, so there will be a bit of a robotic sound, but everything is completely understandable. So thank you so much for attending, and we're really looking forward to this event.
Hi, everyone. I am going to quickly share my PowerPoint with everyone. I hope everyone is having a good lunch. I am here to talk to you today about rethinking heritage protection in the UK, and more specifically about how individual heritage organizations can contribute to the growing implementation of this legislation nationally. It should be going. There we go. So in 2017, the UK passed the Cultural Property Armed Conflict Act, which ratified several different international humanitarian law instruments, including the 1954 Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, and its 1999 Second Protocol. And those are the two instruments that I'll be focusing on, along with domestic considerations for those. So we have ongoing implementation right now. We in the different working groups at UK Blue Shield are looking at these different considerations, and a lot of the considerations are on the left side here, where it's at the national heritage body level and the regional heritage body level. And while people are looking at individual heritage organization and actor levels, it's not quite as developed because they're still trying to build those networks and those different points of contact and these sorts of things as they continue to implement it nationally. So today, we're going to be focusing on this lower level of implementation and how individual actors can contribute to the ongoing implementation at those higher levels. So it's sort of reorienting that approach. When you're looking at cultural property protection within the scope of these different instruments, there are 5 main key safeguarding measures. It starts with heritage identification. It goes to heritage prioritization of the heritage that's been identified. And then there's considerations for in-place protection and transport protection. So transport protection includes where you're evacuating collections and where you're evacuating it to. And protection in place or in situ, depending on how you want to communicate that, is looking at both the place where the evacuated collections are going to end up and also where unevacuated collections or historic structures are going to stay in place. So you might need to take extra precautions for fire, collapse, and other things that might directly impact the structures or the remaining collections there. So we're going to look at some of these different measures today and some of the maybe introductory considerations that heritage institutions and organizations should be considering. This is not meant to be all inclusive. This is ongoing. As I say, they are still trying to find ways to better communicate guidance in this area. So this is some introductory points of discussion. It's not meant to be a end all be all by any means. but it will introduce you to some of the maybe alternate considerations that you may not have thought about related to conflict centered heritage protection. So first you have heritage identification. At the national level, there has been guidance released, and England and DCMS have released guidance. Scotland and Northern Ireland have also released guidance, which echoes the same guidance that DCMS and the UK have provided. That guidance provides a list of categories of heritage that is currently considered to be under protection per Article 1 of the 1954 Hague Convention. If you are an individual institution or organization, library, museum, any of these sorts of things, you need to be aware of this list and consider whether your property or your collections are on this list. An awareness of this will be important in the event of an emergency, but also will come up later in instances where additional advocacy may be necessary or local coordination may be additionally necessary because, for instance, if you're a more localized institution, national resources would probably go to the institutions that are on this list. So you need to be aware of where those resources are going so you can make your own planning accordingly. So identify whether you're on the list. There is guidance available. It is, you can Google it. It's pretty easily available if you Google the guidance and your country name. If your heritage is not on the list and you feel it is of appropriate significance, which the legislation, the 54 Hague Convention and its protocol have a threshold of importance. If you feel your heritage meets that threshold of importance and it was not included on the list for whatever reason, it is important for you to voice your concerns. And I give a few different examples of heritage which people might consider of interest to be added to the list, which it is unclear right now whether those are on the list. They are definitely not in the categories. And if your heritage is on the list, you need to be aware that you need to potentially take extra steps to ensure that your organization is appropriately meeting its obligations under the Hague Convention. And moreover, you need to establish communication with different groups, whether that's DCMS, your regional heritage agency, or additional military related stakeholders so that they can provide you guidance about what to do in a conflict scenario. You also will want to request a clear point of contact on the implementation and also just generally to get more information, because as circumstances change, you'll want to have somewhere that you can get accurate information, because there is the potential of communication lines being down and misinformation and this sort of thing. So you want to make sure that that is there too, which is another thing that you can advocate for if you're unable to establish that. As you're looking to prioritize heritage, as you're identifying it, you will want to make sure that you're taking additional considerations of the risks to facilities and collections under protection that are nearby military entities and vulnerable points. The definition of vulnerable points is explicit in the Hague Convention, but without going into too much detail, it includes things that might be used by military personnel, bridges, radio towers, ports, things of this sort. And also areas that are more densely urban and this sort of thing are also at greater risk historically during conflict scenarios, largely because they tend to be areas where there are a lot of vulnerable points. So you need to be aware of what's around you and whether or not that makes certain areas of your structures more vulnerable, whether that makes your collections or where your collections are stored more vulnerable, and how that affects your military related planning, not necessarily for the military to assist, because if you communicate, they may be busy elsewhere because there's a war or something, but you need to be aware of the potential risk to your collections from military action nearby or from targeting of military entities by the other side, the adversarial forces. Now, you also need to look at what parts of your collection are most vulnerable physically. Sensitive objects like stained glass, intricate building facades, these sorts of things are more likely to be sensitive to vibration. As we saw recently in Ukraine, portions of the cathedral, the Sophia Cathedral at the World Heritage Site there, part of the building's facade fell off due to vibration or concussion. And these are the types of things that, even though you may not have a direct impact, they can directly affect and damage your building. So you need to be aware of these potential impacts. So you can plan accordingly. You can get scaffolding and lumber and all these other things that you might need. And you also want to do that with movable collections as well, and be aware of additional risks of those collections to things like fire, which I give the examples of film and paper and textiles, which are disproportionately affected by fire, but there's also vibration and other risks. And then you also want to consider the risks to your collections and your heritage due to it's associated with a targeted group or identity of a vulnerable group or a group that's historically been targeted. As we're seeing again in Ukraine, there are examples where it appears strongly that Russia has been targeting places of Ukrainian identity. And for instance, if Ukrainian identity for some reason was targeted on UK soil, being aware that you have Ukrainian heritage collections or buildings or whatever would be very useful for you when planning your emergency strategies. That goes for other groups that have been historically targeted as well, as we saw in the 90s and in World War II and all these other clear examples where identity can be the area that is targeted. So an awareness of that vulnerability is also important when you're considering the prioritization of your collections. And a lot of people get grab lists. Like, these are the most important 5 things that I'm going to grab in case of emergency. And these are more or less standard with a lot of different institutions. But these additional considerations are things that you're going to want to add into your current planning that's already established, right? Excuse me. And finally, you want to reach out to emergency services and military stakeholders to explore additional information about your heritage and how to explore how to best communicate additional information about your heritage to them, because they may require additional details to better operate in the vicinity of your heritage structures, if that's required, or they may need more information if they're required to do emergency salvage or recovery in the area as well. So next, you have planning and fire and collapse. This is largely established. Fire, theft, and flooding, as many of us know, is a well-established approach to emergency management in the UK, and a lot of institutions have those considerations. But you want to make sure that those established considerations, wow, that went crazy. You want to make sure that the established considerations for fire and flooding and all of these sorts of things all also include consideration for conflict. So you want to make sure that the current risk assessments and risk registers consider conflict and the institution's proximity to military entities. You need to consider whether there's explicit considerations for those conflict-related risks, and apologies, and consider consulting with military and emergency services about potential risks related to that, because these are really the people that will have the specialist knowledge to help you know how to best bolster your building from a potential collapse or these sorts of things potentially in these specific circumstances. So ideally, opening those channels proactively is always a good idea, as I say. And then you will also want to make sure that you're considering the potential scenario where your collections have not been evacuated when you're looking at your fire and collapse planning. The often chaotic circumstances surrounding conflict sometimes mean that our best plans cannot be put into action the way we plan them. And that needs to be in our plans so that they are dynamic and can make sure that things are safe if they can't be relocated. So while we may wish to evacuate things and have that as our first priority, we have to also consider that the very real scenario might be there that it cannot be evacuated. So you want to include that in the fire and collapse planning as well, which is something that is somewhat unique to conflict because it is such a widespread scenario. Unlike localized disasters, which tend to affect a given radius or area, conflict is something that is so widespread that it becomes difficult for it to be managed in traditional ways. So it is important to consider that. However, if you do manage to relocate your items to the offsite storage, or if you still have collections in offsite storage, you also want to include those areas in your fire and collapse planning. So lastly, you want to address your evacuation of collections and safe storage. Ideally, where feasible, stakeholders should consider secure offsite storage to evacuate their movable heritage away from conflict areas, because the safest area is out of the zone of conflict. Yes. These areas should be situated, again, further from high-risk areas and entities. If you have your storage away from your building, which is in a main city, but it's next to a military ammunitions depot, that's not probably a great idea. So you need to have awareness of what is around your storage as well. And this may require you to contact military entities, or rather military stakeholders. But it is, again, a great part of that building of networks and awareness in your planning. You want to also consider whether or not you're still in an urban area, as this is higher risk. And you will also want to potentially consider reaching out to your local communities during preparations to avoid, or rather to reduce, the risk of looting. Often heritage is used as a uniter in conflict scenarios. And if you start fostering those attitudes early on, that can reduce unwanted tertiary risks of theft and looting, which may be there if you've relocated your collections to a store, or people have noticed that you've relocated the collections to the store. Also, you want, if you're interested in learning more about collective refuge areas for multiple institutions to store their heritage in if it is otherwise not available to you. Apologies. Uh, there is a mechanism in the legislation for designated refuges. However, that requires the national body to take into consideration the designation of them, and that requires the money and support to do that. So if enough voiced interest is there, they may consider redesignating something. But right now, the interest hasn't been expressed and it's not there. So if you're interested in that, be sure to voice that. But keep in mind that this is something intended to shelter heritage that has been put on the list and movable collections that are on the list of protected items. So this isn't for every single thing in the entire country. It is prioritized because you can only have so many refuges. But again, that's looking at where your heritage is, if it's on that list, if you want it to be on that list, if you feel it meets the threshold in the legislation, and communicating with both your regional heritage agencies and with those national bodies. Which brings me to the final point, which, as I've said throughout this, is advocacy. So, as I said in the beginning, this is a developing phenomena. We have just more recently had this pass in the UK, and they're just starting to get some, the ball rolling, so to speak, nationally for implementation. As such, things are still building, and indicating need is a big part of that. While the national and regional people are trying to pull their planning and works together for guidance and other planning and information for all of you heritage actors and just more widely. So if you have specific concerns or questions, it's important to advocate for yourself and your needs. There needs to be a clear point of contact. There needs to be additional guidance potentially, and what you want out of that guidance or what you need out of that guidance for your institution. Uh, you know, if your heritage has been excluded and you feel it shouldn't have, you can always voice that. If you have an interest in the UK reconsidering designated refuges, again, that's an important point. And there's also additional considerations which may be of interest, such as centers containing monuments. If you and the number of heritage institutions or buildings nearby are in a large cluster and you are not directly nearby a military entity or vulnerable point, there are legislative mechanisms to be collectively recognized for protection as well, but that requires advocacy and communicating that to the national body. So I also recommend reaching out and communicating that as well if you have an interest. And then ongoing communication with the different stakeholders is also important. So I think that wraps up everything. Yeah. And I hope that provided some cursory introductory information for heritage protection at the lower level of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittni. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, okay. So Maria points out that Ukrainian heritage has already been targeted in the UK, so that, you know, kind of emphasizes that. I didn't know that. Yeah, thanks everyone. I apologize that I have been half coughing. I didn't want to drink too much through it, but yeah. If there's any other questions, let us know. Implementation is ongoing, and UK Blue Shield is intimately involved with multiple different facets of that. So if you have questions, you can always contact UK Blue Shield as well. But I would usually recommend contacting your regional agencies or DCMS first, if that's all right.
Looks like we have one question in the chat. Mark asks, what has been the official statement by the UN regarding the Israel-Gaza conflict, Ukraine and other conflict zones, and their updates, if any?
I am not part of the UN. I can't comment on that. Sorry.
Neve asks, have you seen legislation outside of the UK that you think is a good model?
I am very much a fan of the model that appears to have been implemented in, I want to say it was Switzerland, if not Sweden. My apologies. I get them mixed up occasionally. I know they are completely different countries. But one of them does their refuges and preparation by the different, using UK terminology, it would be counties. So each county has a different preparation that they do collectively, and then they have their own storages and points of contact. And then all of those different counties talk to the wider legislation, and they have a very clear chain of communication and a very clear system of action, which I think is really useful. Yep. So I think Iona has a bit of advertising for our next talk.
Yes. So our next webinar will be Friday, July 18th, same time from 12:30 to 1 p.m. And it will be hosted by Dr. Nigel Pollard, who is a professor in the Department of History, Heritage and Classics at the Swansea University in Wales. And he will be focusing on the historical perspectives from Britain and Italy in the Second World War on how to protect domestic cultural property in conflict. So we hope that you can make it. And thank you so much for attending this event.
Thank you again.